The sky burned. Elias Cross stood at the edge of a frozen ridge, a cigarette between his lips, watching fire spill from the heavens. The clouds churned with streaks of green light as something massive tore through the atmosphere, moving like a vengeful god. They were here. He exhaled slowly, the cold biting at his face. Figured it'd be someone ugly. The Zalari dreadnought punched through the troposphere like a blade through bone, its black hull reflecting the last rays of the sun. Smaller warships peeled off, descending toward the cities. No warnings. No demands. Just extermination. Elias tapped the cigarette, letting the ember fall into the snow. All right then. He turned, moving fast, his boots crunching over ice. His cabin was a few miles downhill, a reinforced shelter loaded with weapons, supplies, and just enough firepower to turn this frozen hell into a war zone. The comms in his ear crackled. Cross. You seeing this? Hard to miss, Elias muttered, picking up speed. This is it, man. They're coming down hard. New York's gone. LA is burning. The bastards are landing troops worldwide. Good, Elias growled. Saves me the trip. A pause. Then laughter. Bitter, sharp. Knew you'd say something like that. We're rallying in D.C. You coming? Elias reached his cabin, throwing the door open. His arsenal gleamed in the dim light, rifles, grenades, a .50 cal sniper, and a modified X-12 railgun he had no business owning. Not yet, he said, grabbing his gear. I got a welcoming party to attend first. The first Solari drop pod hit the valley below like a meteorite, snow and debris exploding in all directions. Elias crouched behind an outcrop, railgun locked against his shoulder. The pod split open with a mechanical hiss, releasing 6 towering figures, biomechanical nightmares wrapped in black armor, their limbs pulsing with shifting tendrils. They spread out fast, moving with the precision of a species that had never lost a war. Elias smirked. Let's change that. He squeezed the trigger. The railgun shrieked, a tungsten round punching through the first Solari's skull, detonating its head in a spray of black ichor and shattered metal. The others turned instantly, scanning, reacting, too slow. Elias was already moving. He vaulted down the ridge, switching to his assault rifle. 3-round burst. The nearest Solari staggered as rounds punched through its carapace, its adaptive flesh trying, and failing, to heal. The remaining 4 adjusted, deploying hard light shields, shifting their armor to counter kinetic rounds. Clever. Elias grinned. All right, let's play. He lobbed a grenade, rolling it between their feet. One tried to kick it away. Bad move. The explosion ripped through them, sending 2 flying, their torsos reduced to molten slag. The last 2 adapted, their forms twisting, growing extra limbs, armored plates shifting into full combat mode. They rushed him, faster than any human could react. Elias didn't react like a human. He dropped his rifle, drew his combat knife, and stepped in. The first Solari lunged. Elias twisted, driving the knife into its neck joint. It spasmed, shrieking in its alien tongue. The second swung a bladed arm, Elias ducked, ripping the knife free and shoving it into the second one's eye socket. They collapsed. Elias stepped back, breathing hard. Snow soaked in black ichor steamed around him. The first engagement was over. He checked his watch. 8 minutes. Too slow. The Solari command ship hovered over Washington, D.C., a fortress of metal and death. Inside, High Commander Varesh watched the battlefield unfold, his golden eyes narrowing. Unacceptable, he hissed. His adjutant, a wiry figure with pulsing neural implants, approached. Their resistance is anomalous. Civilian populations are armed. Their tactics. Varesh cut him off. Their tactics are madness. There is no order, no pattern. They fight as if they have nothing to lose. Perhaps because they don't. Varesh turned, his tendrils curling in irritation. They are a lesser species. A failed experiment of nature. He motioned to the screens. Deploy the adaptive legion. Crush their cities. Find this. Elias Cross. The adjutant hesitated. Varesh's voice sharpened. Speak. The adjutant gestured toward a blood-smeared report. The forward teams, they were erased. The unit sent to neutralize the human target in the northern region. Destroyed? Not just destroyed, the adjutant murmured. He sent a message back using their own comms. Varesh frowned. Play it. The comms crackled, and a voice, deep, amused, and utterly human, filled the room. You sent 6. That wasn't nearly enough. Come find me. The room fell silent. For the first time in his 1,000-year reign, Varesh felt something unfamiliar. A sliver of doubt. Elias stared up at the sky, watching the war unfold. Fire streaked across the horizon. Cities burned. Humans fought like cornered animals, and the Zalari weren't prepared for it. Good. His comm pinged. You alive? Elias chuckled. You sound disappointed. You know me, Cross. Always figured you'd die in some dumb bar fight. Not today. A pause. Then, we need you in DC. They're hitting us with everything. Elias flexed his fingers. Blood dried on his gloves. His heartbeat was steady. Controlled. On my way. He picked up his rifle, took one last look at the Zalari corpses rotting in the snow, and started walking. The hunt had begun. The ruins of Washington burned under an alien sky. Zalari war machines lumbered through the streets, their blackened carapaces pulsing with sickly light as they processed the remains of the resistance. Civilians lay scattered in the debris, their weapons shattered, their bodies broken. The city was dying. But Elias Cross was still breathing. He crouched in the wreckage of an overturned bus, the scent of burning metal thick in the air. A Zalari patrol swept past, their towering forms moving in perfect sync, scanning for movement. Their mistake was assuming nothing human could still be alive here. Elias tapped his earpiece. Voss, tell me you're in. Dr. Helena Voss's voice crackled over the line. Inside the mainframe now. Give me a second. We don't have a second, Elias muttered. He tightened his grip on his rifle, watching the Zalari through his scope. Their armor had shifted since Alaska, now layered in adaptive plating, pulsing with strange new energy. They were learning. Good. So was he. The lead alien stopped. Its elongated skull tilted, sensing something. Elias fired. The round cracked through its head, dropping it instantly. The others turned, weapons glowing, but Elias was already moving, weaving through the rubble. Plasma bolts hissed past, melting concrete, searing the air. He dove behind a wrecked police car, swapping mags, breathing steady. Voss came back on. Almost there. No pressure, Elias grunted, popping up just long enough to take another shot. A Zalari's chest caved in, dark ichor spraying against the ruined pavement. You're making a mess. Not my fault they bleed ugly. Another explosion rocked the street. The Zalari were done playing, a siege walker stomped into view, its massive frame bristling with plasma cannons. It scanned for targets, its glowing eyes locking onto Elias's position. Voss swore. They brought a Titan? They really don't like you. Elias smirked. They'll like me even less in a minute. He sprinted for cover, weaving through alleyways as the siege walker fired, obliterating buildings in its path. The Zalari were relentless, efficient, but predictable. Voss, status. Her voice was tense. Almost there, just keep them busy. Elias ducked behind a broken wall, watching the machine stalk forward, its cannons charging. The thing was nearly indestructible from the front. So he wouldn't fight it from the front. He pulled a small EMP grenade from his belt. Time for a history lesson. What are you doing? Voss demanded. Something stupid. he sprinted straight toward the walker. The Zalari pilot reacted immediately, adjusting its cannons, calculating the shot. But humans didn't play by their rules. Elias slid beneath the war machine, throwing the EMP directly onto its underbelly. The blast surged through its systems, its joints locked, lights flickered. It staggered, off balance for half a second. That was all he needed. He vaulted onto its back, yanking open a maintenance hatch, jamming his rifle inside. The Zalari pilot inside screamed as Elias emptied the entire magazine into its core. The walker shuddered, convulsed, then collapsed. Voss's laughter rang in his ear. "You are actually insane. Never claimed otherwise." Elias hopped down from the wreckage, reloading. "Tell me you've got good news." There was a pause. Then, "I have control of their orbital cannons." Elias grinned. "Voss, you beautiful lunatic. I can only fire once before they shut me out. One is all we need." He scanned the Zalari positions, then locked eyes on the command spire, a massive structure looming over the ruins. The heart of their operations. "Hit the spire." Voss hesitated. "That'll vaporize half the city." Elias's jaw tightened. "Better us than them." A long pause. Then, "Firing now." Above, the sky split open. A searing white beam lanced down from orbit, tearing through the command spire, ripping it apart in a blinding explosion. The shockwave flattened everything in its wake. Zalari forces scrambled, their formations collapsing. Elias watched from cover, his ears ringing, his breath ragged. It was chaos. The aliens were breaking. "We did it," Voss whispered. Elias wiped blood from his forehead. "Not yet." Because something was still moving in the wreckage of the spire. A figure emerged, twisted and monstrous, its body shifting in real time, a Zalari warform, unlike anything he'd seen. It turned its golden eyes on him and spoke in a voice like shattered glass. "Human." Elias raised his rifle. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ruins smoldered as Elias steadied his rifle, his gaze locked on the abomination stepping out of the wreckage. The Zalari warform was unlike anything he'd encountered before, its biomechanical plating rippled, reshaping itself as if its body couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Tendrils coiled along its arms, twitching with barely contained energy, and its golden eyes burned with something that almost resembled curiosity. It took a step forward. Elias took two back. "Human," it said, its voice jagged, shifting tones like it was trying to find the right frequency. "You have caused complications." Elias kept his rifle trained, finger resting light on the trigger. "Good." The creature tilted its head. "You believe this is victory? You believe you're still in control?" The spire's ruins hissed behind it, molten metal dripping from where the orbital strike had carved through the structure like a hot blade. The sky still glowed from the aftershock. The Zalari forces had fractured, those that weren't dead were scattered, leaderless. If this thing was here, it meant the chain of command had just been forced to improvise. That was bad for them. Great for him. "Your species is an anomaly," the creature continued, stepping over the charred remains of its kind. "No coordination. No unity. Yet, you fight like something far worse. A virus. A parasite." Elias smirked. "Call me whatever helps you sleep at night." It studied him, then gestured toward the destruction. "Your resistance is futile. You have survived longer than projected, but the outcome is inevitable. You cannot outlast the Zalari. See, that's the problem with you assholes." Elias rolled his shoulders, keeping his stance loose. "You think this is about outlasting you?" The warform's plating shifted again, its frame bulking, hardening, adapting to potential threats. "You are alone. Your forces are scattered. Your civilization is collapsing." Elias exhaled slowly, watching its movement. He wasn't alone. Not really. "Voss," he murmured under his breath, barely above a whisper. Her voice crackled in his ear. I'm here. You still got access to their systems? A pause. Then, I can break into their tactical relays. Why? Elias's grip on his rifle tightened. I need you to make sure it hears this. Voss hesitated, but then he heard her fingers tapping rapidly against the console. A moment later, a faint pulse echoed through the air. The warform stiffened. It could hear her too now. Done, she whispered. Elias smiled. You think you understand us, he said, stepping forward. You've studied our history, seen our wars, mapped our genetics. You've run the numbers. Calculated probabilities. You assume you've covered every angle. The warform didn't respond, but its posture shifted. But here's the thing, Elias continued, lowering his rifle just slightly. You don't know what it's like to fight something that doesn't just survive. You've never faced something that gets meaner the longer the war drags on. That learns. That adapts. The warform's golden eyes flickered. We are the apex of adaptation. No, Elias said, grinning coldly. You're just fast at learning the wrong lesson. The Zalari tensed. Explain. Elias flicked his wrist, activating his last failsafe. Deep beneath the ruined city, a series of stolen Zalari charges detonated in perfect sequence. The tremor ripped through the battlefield, and suddenly, the sky was filled with fire. The creature staggered. Elias didn't give it time to recover. He moved. Fast. His first shot punched through the warform's shoulder. Black ichor splattered, but it was already regenerating. Elias knew it would. He closed the distance, slamming the butt of his rifle into its head. It barely flinched, but it reacted, its form shifting instinctively, exposing a weak point for half a second. That was all he needed. Elias drove his knife into the exposed tissue at the base of its throat and twisted. The warform screeched, its body convulsing. It wasn't dying yet, but it was hurt, more than it should be. You didn't plan for this, did you? Elias hissed. The warform lashed out, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, rolling with the impact. The creature clutched its throat, golden eyes flaring in frustration. You should not be able to wound me, it rasped. Elias wiped the blood from his mouth. And yet, here we are. It took a step forward, then faltered. Its form glitched, tendrils seizing up. It was trying to repair itself. Trying to adapt. But something was wrong. Voss's voice returned, low and sharp. Elias, what the hell did you do? Made sure it adapted to the wrong thing. His knife was coated in nanite disruptors, stolen from Zalari tech and re-engineered to attack rather than repair. The warform realized it too late. You corrupted me, it rasped. Elias smirked, leveling his rifle. Welcome to Earth. He fired. The Zalari shattered, its adaptive form turning against itself, layers peeling away in violent self-destruction. It convulsed, screamed, and then... nothing. The battlefield was silent. Elias exhaled, lowering his rifle. He tapped his earpiece. Voss? You're still breathing? Mostly. He glanced at the crumbling wreckage where the warform had stood. How's the rest of the field looking? Zalari command is in disarray. Whatever that thing was, it was linked to their forces. They're retreating, scrambling for order. Elias chuckled. Told you they were learning the wrong lesson. Voss was quiet for a beat. Then, what now? He cracked his neck, checking his ammo. Now? He glanced at the sky, where the remaining Zalari ships hesitated, caught between fleeing and fighting a war they no longer understood. Now we finish this. The sky was bleeding fire. The Zalari fleet, once an indomitable force, wavered. Their formations fractured, their movements uncertain. Their commanders were scrambling for control, struggling to make sense of the impossible. The Deathworlders weren't just resisting. They were winning. Elias Cross stood in the center of the battlefield, dust and blood smeared across his face, his rifle hanging loosely at his side. His heartbeat was steady. His breath controlled. Around him, the last remnants of the Zalari ground forces collapsed, their bodies convulsing as their genetic adaptations turned against them. A voice crackled in his ear. "Elias." Voss sounded strained, but exhilarated. "They're pulling back. Their command ship is shifting orbit. You did it." Elias ran a hand across his jaw, watching as the alien war machine staggered, reeled, broke. "No," he muttered. "Not yet." The Zalari weren't just going to leave. They never left a war unfinished. They would regroup. Recalculate. Adapt. If Elias let them escape, they'd return stronger. "Patch me into their command frequency," he said. Voss hesitated. "That's not a good idea." "Wasn't asking." A pause. Then the static shifted, the channel opening. And suddenly, Elias was inside their war machine, inside their network. He could hear the frantic voices, the desperate orders. He could smell their fear. And they could hear him. "This is Elias Cross," he said, voice even, steady. "To whatever's left of your command, I have one message for you." The Zalari comms crackled with interference. Then, a cold voice responded. "This is Strategic Overseer Koresh. State your terms, human." Elias exhaled slowly. "Terms? You don't get terms." Silence. "You came to this planet expecting another conquest. You thought we'd break. That we'd kneel. That we'd fear you." He let his words sink in, let them crawl into whatever hive mind logic they used. "Look around. This is what happens when you underestimate humans." Koresh's voice was controlled, but there was an edge of something else now, something the Zalari weren't supposed to feel. "Your world is in ruin. Your cities are destroyed. How can you possibly consider this victory?" Elias chuckled. It was a dark, sharp sound, filled with something the Zalari did not understand. "Because you're running, and we're still here." The comms went dead silent. Then Koresh spoke, slower now, like a creature trying to process its own mortality. You are not like the others." "No," Elias agreed. "We're worse." A deep hum vibrated through the battlefield. The Zalari fleet was charging weapons, preparing a final, desperate purge strike. If they couldn't win, they'd make sure Earth burned with them. Voss's voice cut through the chaos. "Elias, they're locking in planetary bombardment. We don't have the firepower to stop them." Elias rolled his shoulders. "Yeah, we do." He glanced at the wreckage of the Zalari warform, still twitching, its severed neural links connected to the Zalari fleet. A back door. A direct link into their systems. "Voss," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "I need you to do something for me." A pause. Then, "I already don't like this." He knelt by the ruined Zalari biocircuitry, gripping the pulsating neural core. "Patch me through to their ship network." "You want me to do what?" Elias pulled a blade from his belt, digging it into the Zalari neural tissue, forcing direct interface. His skull burned as the alien network flooded into him, a rush of data, orders, fear. The Zalari battle systems, their communications, their targeting arrays, they were all connected. "Elias." Voss's voice was distant, frantic. "You're overriding a Zalari war core with nothing but human biology. Do you have any idea what that'll do to your nervous system?" Elias clenched his jaw. "Not my biggest concern right now." The alien interface shuddered as his presence infected it. Zalari officers screamed as their neural networks overloaded, their minds crashing under the weight of something they weren't programmed to handle. Human improvisation. Elias locked onto their bombardment sequence, forcing it back into their own fleet. Koresh's voice came through again, but this time, it was desperate. "What are you doing?" Elias's eyes burned as he forced the neural override deeper. "Showing you how humans say goodbye." And then, he flipped the kill switch. The Zalari fleet turned on itself. Their cannons, meant to destroy Earth, fired upon their own ships. Their shields collapsed, their formations shattered. Battleships detonated in synchronized death, lighting up the void in a cascade of destruction. On the ground, survivors watched in awe as the sky became a graveyard. Koresh's voice was a whisper now. "This is impossible." Elias wiped blood from his nose, his body shaking from the strain. "No," he muttered, "this is humanity." The last Solari warship vanished in a plume of fire. And then, the war was over. The battlefield was silent. Elias fell to one knee, gripping his head as the neural connection finally snapped. Voss was shouting his name, but it took a second for the world to stop spinning. "You alive?" she asked, breathless. Elias groaned. "Define alive." She let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You just wiped out an entire fleet using nothing but their own tech and sheer human stubbornness. That's gotta be a first." Elias exhaled. "Let's hope it's the last." The ruins of Washington stretched out around him. The fires were still burning, but the war was over. The Zalari Empire had fallen. He pushed himself to his feet, wiping the blood from his chin. "Status on survivors?" Voss was quiet for a moment. "We won't know for a while. But there are people out there. Fighters. Survivors." Elias nodded. "Then we rebuild." Voss sighed. "You ever gonna take a break?" Elias smirked. "I'll rest when I'm dead." He turned toward the horizon, watching as the first dawn since the invasion began to rise. Humanity had survived. And now? Now, the galaxy would never forget them.